Hello, everybody. Welcome to the ABT Time podcast. This is episode 46, recording in late February 2023. And we are back online after not doing much last fall. I think we kind of checked out in November, December. We got so swamped with so much going on in ABT land. Then Matt and I did our one discussion in January to start the year. And now we're getting ready for a whole bunch of episodes that are going to come at you. So as you know, the core theme of every one of these episodes is the ABT in action and really bring in people that have been doing stuff with it, which is really, really fun. One of the major milestones just happened this morning, which is going to be, I think we'll make it our next episode. Park Howell, our longtime part of the course, the business guy, the host of the podcast, The Business of Story, just produced his 400th episode and just posted it this morning. And it is a tour de force of ABT. What he did was went back through all 400 episodes and pulled out everything that had to do with ABT. And so he's probably got a dozen different voices in there, different guests and things who have talked about ABT stuff in the business world mostly. He's only got a little bit from me, and it's tremendous. It shows you how much we've made a major inroad there into the world of business and some of these other disciplines. And he's got Doug Passon on there, who's the co-author of the law book. So it's happening. And more importantly is that we've clearly hit the tipping point this year. It's been 10 long years grinding away, trying to convince people that this is a very powerful tool and kind of a selective process. In fact, nowadays I'm talking about someday I'm going to put together our ABT Early Adopters Hall of Fame, for which today's guest has already earned honorary membership in it. And these are the people who saw the ABT, felt it, and in the first moment realized this is something really powerful and great that we can get a lot of mileage out of. I say we've really hit the tipping point because now we're we just started last week, the 32nd round of the ABT Framework course. Let's see, this one is with, I'm having trouble keeping track of the different groups. This one's with the U.S. Forest Service. The other one that's still about to wrap up this week is with U.S. Department of Agriculture, their Office of the Chief Scientist. And then in another week or so, we'll be launching a new round with Counterpart International, a global nonprofit. And then another one with Forest Service and BLM, and then a whole bunch of other groups that are all coming together. We're pretty well booked all the way into about June now. And once again, still in 10 years' time, not one journalist writing anything about the ABT framework at a significant level. We're talking different cultures here. And eventually I'm going to get into that in some detail. They simply don't understand the power and importance of narrative structure, which sounds like a contradiction in terms because they work with it day in and day out, but they don't understand how incredibly important it is for leadership. And that's a deep, deep topic. So on that note, let's get going with today's episode, which is Tony Martin, professor at Emory University. And Tony, you want to join me now? And I first got to know Tony over the last 2 or 3 years as he began tweeting bits and pieces about what he was doing there, mostly, I think, with undergraduates in Department of Environmental Sciences, or you can tell us exactly your department, your credential, all those sorts of things. I'm the world's worst host when I introduce guests, but that's because we're here to listen to the substance of what you got to say. And that's what we want to get going with. So thanks for joining me, Tony. And how are you today?
I'm doing great. And what's really nice is I got to warm up for this with my class this afternoon. So just not more than 30 minutes ago, we were doing ABT exercises in class.
Amazing. That is excellent. So let's see, tell us your department, your position there in Atlanta, right? Emory University.
That's correct.
Yeah. And then what course do you teach right now?
So I'm a professor of practice, a teaching professor at Emory University. I've been here more than 30 years. With that, in environmental sciences, I'm a paleontologist and geologist by training. My PhD's in geology, but I've taught a whole bunch of different classes related to the environmental sciences. The class in particular that I'm teaching right now that uses the ABT as one of its central core exercises for the students and narrative exercise, the narrative gym that we're doing this semester, That is called environmental communication. So the students are environmental science majors and minors. They're all very smart, highly motivated, hardworking. I really am blessed with great students. But they have not really learned much about narrative structure and giving information in a way that's interesting, other than the and then. Therefore, we have pulled them together into this narrative framework since the very beginning of the semester, and then developing it throughout the semester, leading up to an eventual where they're going to have a story that they're going to tell.
Man, that is really tremendous. So let's see, this discussion is going to be set into the context of my biases and prejudices against younger people. That's a really blunt, cruel way to say it, but it's something that I think needs to be talked about and thought about. And I'm not opposed to the idea of younger people becoming superstars with ABT, but it concerns me the experiences we've had in 10 years, in which we began 10 years ago thinking that we could teach this with youngsters, and then learning the hard way with a bunch of bad experiences, that it not only doesn't work sometimes with them, but sometimes really jumps the track in a possibly damaging way. And yet, done the right way, it's quite possible that it can work really, really well. And it's quite possible that you're doing it the right way. We're going to find out as we dig deeper into all this sort of stuff. Let's begin with, tell me a couple of aha moments. So first off, your first aha moment of reading about the ABT or learning about it. And then secondly, your first experiential aha moment of using it and seeing like, wow, this really works. And keeping in mind one of our sacred rules, which is the power of storytelling rests in the specifics. So try and tell me a couple of really specific stories there. Again, about your first moment with it, and then your first seeing it applied moment.
Well, first I had read your book, Don't Be Such a Scientist. So with that book, it gave me an introduction to how do you tell a story in science in a way that is compelling. With that, then, as a foundation, when I read this one, Houston, we have a narrative, and look at how well used it is.
Nice.
With this book, then, I was then, I think my aha moments were the ways that I could take some of the lessons you had in there and turn them into classroom exercises. So, for example, one of I think the aha moments for me in terms of a simple teaching tool was what you call the Dobzhansky template, where nothing makes sense in the light of evolution, in biology, except in the light of evolution, but making it blank and blank. So nothing makes sense in blank except in the light of blank. So doing that exercise, the first time I did that with students in class, they had a tough time with it at first. But when they realized, oh, we have to have something specific that's referring to something that's more general, it's like, yes. So nothing makes sense in, say, climate change except in the light of carbon dioxide. But I said, you could be even simpler, air. Let's talk about air. And however we can simplify it, that's also part of what we try to do with those exercises. So I think
that's yeah. Excellent, because sadly in our society, I don't see any major loud voices arguing for simplicity. There are countless voices popularizing complexity. There is an element of dazzlement with complexity, and so many journalists make so much money off all these books that just dazzle the readers with all this complexity, and they sit there and wallow in endless. I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm not seeing simple, applicable life lessons coming out of so many of those popular books. They're just big fat things of look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. Oh, it's amazing, 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 amazing. Especially in the world of psychology, they go on and on with dazzlement. And what you're talking about there is the opposite, which is, yeah, the world's dazzling, but yeah, it's actually at the beginning of Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero of a Thousand Faces. He says, of course, there are many different ways that stories are told around the world in different cultures and religions. But this is a book not about the differences. This is about the similarities. Right. And it's through those similarities and getting to the simplicity that there's some hope of advancing somewhat. And is that what you found with working with the students there, is seeing power of that simplicity?
Yeah, part of it is I edit some of the essays. I give them a prompt ahead of time where they have time to think about it. They come in class. I actually hand them a piece of paper that they have to write on, because that's also part of some of the peer-reviewed research about writing is sometimes when you make it a physical act like that, you're better connecting different parts of your brain to engage with that material. So they've had time to think about it. They come in class, they write it down, then they sit down in pairs and one of them reads out loud to the other.
Mm.
So one student just listens.
Yes.
This is then teaching them to listen, because that's part of the communication too. If something sounds off to the person listening or the person speaking, they'll catch it. Reading it just as words on a paper or words on a computer screen doesn't necessarily work for finding where do you need to have that artful pause? Where do you need to speed it up a little bit? Where could you have this dramatic moment? All of those then can be incorporated later on once they understand that it doesn't have to be read off like this, where they're just reading off line to line like that. This teaches them right away then what works, what doesn't, in terms of what sounds good, literally sounds good in what they're saying, or what doesn't. Then we have time.
That's tremendous. That's really, really good. One of the things, and so part of what we're doing here is I'm scrutinizing what you've been doing and going to bluntly give you my thumbs up and thumbs down, my thoughts on some of the things that you're doing. Because you and I have not had any in-depth discussion about what you've been doing. I've sent you a couple of emails. I think we might have had one phone call a while back or something like that.
Yeah, we had one phone call pre-pandemic.
We never really got into the depth. Oh, is that right? It was like four years ago.
Yeah, I think it was 2019.
Wow, amazing. Okay, great. And so as I'm listening to these things, I will especially tell you the things that I like hearing a lot. And one of the patterns that I've discerned, I think, at least I think this is a basic rule, is that shaping narrative, which is what this is all about, shaping narrative. You know, it's in the ABT build exercise that we do. It's everybody can write a first draft in ABT, no problem. It's the shaping process that's really, really tough. And shaping narrative not only takes time, but works better verbally to begin with than written. Something happens as soon as you start writing. You start to complicate things. You start to overthink things. You start to put in lots of big words, that sort of stuff. The key thing that we believe in is the conversational ABT and being conversational about things. And not only that, I'm working with several of my film school classmates are major folks in Hollywood nowadays. And there's one guy in particular I've been working with for a year on comedy series that he sold, is in development right now. And this is the role I'm constantly applying to him, is he sends me long, convoluted chunks of scenes and things like that. And I just say, let's get on the phone. I want you to tell me this. I want to hear it as a story verbally. I want to hear exactly as you say, the inflection. I want to hear why you think this is a great moment, what's going on here, what's building to. And you overcomplicate things by writing it too soon. Best thing you can do is just talk things through and get them to the point where it's conversational. And then it's so easy. And actually adding on to that, last September, I went to Nepal for a week to work with the World Bank folks. And on the flight back, I wrote major chunks of the newest book of the Narrative Gym book. And one of the guys that was there read it a month or so later. And he said, wow, it was really fun reading. You know, I felt like this is stuff we just heard from you. And I said, that was it. I used you guys to present the verbal version of it. And once I got that smoothed out, then all I did was transcribe it, which is really easy to do. So I'd encourage you to think in those terms, but you're already on that track with what you got them doing. That's so good, having them read the stories aloud. You're absolutely right. It's in hearing it that you pick up stuff, and it trains them to be better listeners, which is, have you ever seen any of the stuff we do with Brian Palermo, the improv instructor?
No, I haven't. We do improv later on. Actually, in a couple of weeks, we'll be doing some of that too.
You're making me think it's time to do an episode of the podcast with Brian, specifically about improv. He's one of the course now consists of 10 1-hour sessions. The first 5 I do the nuts and bolts of the model. And then we have 4 guest speakers, Park Howell in the business world, and Brian Palermo, improv instructor, about listening, exactly as you're saying. And then Diana Padilla on writing proposals, and Nancy Knowlton on the history of the American environmental movement, looked at through the ABT lens. But the listening stuff is so important. And I guess that's what I want to push you on even further is, you know, a massive thumbs up on hearing you talk about that, because it's the hardest damn thing. And I don't know if you saw in the second edition of the Don't Be Such a Scientist book, I added a chapter there, Don't Be Such a Poor Listener, because that is just so crucial. What do you see with undergraduates in terms of listening?
They're terrific because once they understand, we do it the first day of class in the semester. So the students who may not like that or don't feel comfortable with it, sometimes they drop the class that day. But from the first day,
seriously?
yeah, seriously, they like, nope, this isn't for me. They say, I thought this was going to be a writing class, and it is a writing class, but it's writing.
All right, wait a second. All right, that's a monumental moment there. Let's explore that a tiny bit more, because
Sure.
You know, a lot of scientists hate me because I don't worship them. Look at my first book, Don't Be Such a Scientist. You know, that was not raving about scientists are the saviors of humanity. It's more along the lines of Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, which is that these guys have a lot to contribute, but you'd better realize they're not tapped in at times with some of these human dynamics. And not only that, they're opting pathways to avoid that very thing. That is a major pattern. We had at one major university with Brian Palermo 10 years ago, when he was doing this Connection Storymaker workshop with me, we had a day where he was put into a room with about a dozen biophysics PhD students to do improv games and the stuff that you do routinely with improv. And several of them stood there with their arms folded, and then two or three finally just walked out of the room. And he said to me, this has never happened to me in Hollywood, where people pay money to get trained in improv. Right. Some of these science people say this is bullshit and just walk out like that. And it ain't bullshit. You know, say goodbye to your entire profession if you don't figure this communication stuff out. It's really reaching crisis stage. So it's good to hear that you're working with them on that dynamic early on. But it's a shame that you've ended up with a selective situation where those people can just walk out of the room and tell themselves, you know, I know how to control this. I'm just not going to bother with this stuff. They really need to.
Yeah, although I have to say that's relatively rare in recent years because now the course has its own reputation.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
A good reputation. So now, for instance, I limit it to 16 students so that we can have
excellent
eight pairs.
Yeah.
And I'll try to mix them up as much as possible.
Oh, wow. And how long have you been doing the course?
Oh, I think since 2019. My department chair asked me to come up with a writing intensive course that fulfills an upper level writing requirement in Emory College, and something that could help our students to be better communicators. So I actually have receipts. These are some of my books. Nice. And I had that as my background. So my department chair's saying, could you teach some of what you do with your writing to our environmental science major?
Okay, wait a second. Let's take a moment. And because I do such a lousy job of the introduction, tell us about your books.
Yeah, as a paleontologist and geologist, I also study the traces, tracks, trails, burrows, nests, and other evidence that animals largely leave in the geologic record. But with that, I also look at modern traces and how do those compare to one another so that we can interpret the ancient past. Inherent in those are stories. There are lovely little stories about 150 million years ago, a little beetle was going across the sand dune. And then it turned to the right.
Where did you do your PhD?
The University of Georgia, just about 100 kilometers that way behind my shoulder.
Right. In paleontology?
In geology. So my PhD is in geology, and I'm a paleontologist, but I was also interested in writing for the public. So I've started writing popular books, popular science outreach books. Starting in 2013 was my first book that came out. And then
what was that? Wait, what was that title?
That was titled Life Traces of the Georgia Coast. And it was a big doorstopper of a book, but it was really written for a popular audience while having this scholarly foundation. Then after that, I wrote, this has probably been my most popular book. This is Dinosaurs Without Bones.
Oh, wow.
So it's about how would you interpret dinosaur behavior from the geologic record if you didn't have any bones? That's kind of the premise of it.
Yeah. Another question. What year did you finish your PhD?
That would have been 1992.
92. So when did you graduate undergrad?
Undergraduate was in 82.
Oh, okay,
Little,
great.
little bitty college in northern Indiana, the frozen tundra of northern Indiana,
What college?
St. Joseph's College.
Wow. Um, did you were you a fan of the writings of Stephen Jay Gould?
I was, and I knew that you knew him. I met him once before his death.
Yeah.
I did like his writings. I did see that he enjoyed complexity in his
Yeah.
writings. He did enjoy that. He reveled in it and teasing it apart. So when I've gone back and read some of his essays, I do try to look at what's the underpinning narrative structure of what he's writing. And sometimes he really nails it. Other times he kind of loses me. So then I
Well,
need to go
yeah,
back and
he
reread it.
did. Sadly, he needed an editor and
Yeah.
never wanted to admit that. He was proud of the fact that the deal he made with Natural History column was that, he got to edit things on it. He had final say so on the creative control of the columns there. But the collections that they did, starting with Ever Since Darwin and Panda's Thumb and all of those collection books, those had the heavy hand of an editor in there shaping them. And those essays are so unbelievably good. They're the best things I think I ever read in my entire science education. His ability, and he had a gift for simplicity and communication. He was a tremendous lecturer. You're right, he would go off in the weeds sometimes. And sadly, at the end of his career, the last book that he wrote was just an embarrassment. I think a lot of the fans of Gould just threw their hands down when that thing came out. But that said, and certainly books like Ontogeny and Phylogeny were kind of impenetrable. But the broader things that he did, and especially when he would yield to an editor, were not just so good. And this is my limited readings and things like that. But I don't feel there's been any other communicators on evolution that have gotten to the core of these the heart of these core principles that could bring so much enlightenment into society. If only there were ever someone who could bridge the divide between his writings on evolutionary principles, and the world of politics, for starters. There's so many things, adaptive radiation, principles like that. His essay on why are there no more baseball players with over 400 batting average. There's so, and on what am I trying to think of? But there's so many of his essays that map directly onto the way our society changes, because it's all selection over time with society. And there's just no understanding or discussion of selection among politicians or the people that are in charge of, that are the selective agents that are passing these rules and laws and things like that shape society. There's so much that could have been learned from him, but I'm glad to hear that you read his stuff, because he's just tremendous. And so what's the next book after that? Third, you have three, you say?
Let's see. So let's see. Life Traces of the Georgia Coast. That was in 2013. Dinosaurs Without Bones was 2014. The Evolution Underground. This is about burrowing animals through time.
Wow.
So natural history of burrows. And I wanted to have the subtitle to be How Burrows Changed the World.
Now, wait a second. Is there plenty of coverage of invertebrates in that book, or is it just mammals? Okay,
yeah.
All right, good. Okay.
Invertebrates and vertebrates all the way through. Yeah. And
Wow.
then this one I put out. This is kind of a collection of essays from a blog I did about the Georgia coast called Tracking the Golden Isles.
Wow.
And it's mostly stories. There are 26 essays in here that are mostly based on field experiences that I've had on the Georgia coast that have just really interesting animal behavior kind of implications, or how do you apply this to understanding the geologic record or going into the future? How do we use the past to predict the future, particularly with climate change? My next book then is coming out in May, in just a couple of months from now.
May, and what's that one on?
That one is called Life Sculpted. So it's about the natural history of bioerosion. Shells, wood, rock, bones, those four types of hard substrates. When did life start breaking those down? How does life break those down? And how did that, in a way, shape the world as well? The original title, and it's with University of Chicago Press, who you've published with. The original title, they actually made me change it It was Life is Boring.
Oh no.
I
Oh, how
know.
could they change
How
that?
could they? I know.
Oh, come
I'm still
on.
depressed about it.
Did you try and fight that?
I did, but
What's the title?
the title is Life Sculpted. So it's a classier
Ah,
title, but it doesn't have the
ay,
fun.
caramba. That
But
is a
every talk I'm
brilliant
going to give
title.
about this book is going to start with the sentence, Life is boring.
Life is boring. That is so good. Um, have you ever studied shipworms?
Yes. So
Did you know who
shipworms,
did you know who Ruth
actually,
yeah, did you
that's a
know who
good,
Ruth Turner was?
yeah, that's a good part of the book. In fact,
Oh
because,
wow.
yeah, there's a
She was on
chapter.
my thesis committee. She
Yeah.
was tremendous.
Yeah.
What a
Well,
character.
yeah, she's done terrific work. And there's lots of other people who have applied it to the fossil record too. And like
You know, it's
when,
so funny in all this narrative stuff. You meet these scientists who view the entire world through their one species or type of species, and she viewed the entire world through Torito, boring
that's
worms.
right.
Exactly. Everything that she saw in the world was a function of that. She was a total character, and yeah, it was on my thesis committee. And yeah, that's awesome that you've got chapter on that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So burrowing bivalves in general.
Yeah, yeah. So that's
Yeah.
part of it. And I also have a chapter in there about moon snails. And that
Hmm.
chapter is titled Jewelry Amenable Holes of Death.
That's great. Um, that's all wonderful. Gee, many Christmas. Well, this becomes really a nice compliment or piece of flattering to the ABT that a guy with all of that background would converge on the ABT as a tool, as you've done, and see the value in it. So, as I say, you are securing your place in the early adopters Hall of Fame for the ABT. Really
Excellent.
tremendous. Now, let me ask you a couple of current questions.
Mhm.
What do you know about the MAT template?
The Matt template,
The MAT template.
is that like Matt as in Matthew?
Yeah. Okay, sorry. So I'm giving you
Ah,
your reading assignment. So I
okay.
just sent you the PDF of the new book, and so
Right.
chapter 3 presents that. And this is sort of the next level for you to start thinking about. And we don't want to get ahead of the game and have you starting to complicate your simple ABT training. But
Mm,
that said, you can hopefully do as we've tried to do, which is you expand your knowledge, but then you keep constraining it back down and keep trying to do
yes.
house cleaning. And Matt, who you met there, Matt was 3 years ago my assistant in the work that I was doing, and I asked him to do the logistics for the course. And his background is in screenwriting, so he understands narrative structure really well to begin with. He was kind of pre-programmed for the whole course. And then within about 6 months, he began saying comments back to me about, did you ever think about this? What about this? You realize this? And I began to realize, wait a second, this guy's got a brain in addition to his organizational skills. And year after year now, we've done 3 years of the course and 30 some rounds. He's gotten deeper and deeper into it, so much so that now he's really become my equal in a fair extent in terms of teaching ABT stuff. 2 weeks ago, he took the assignment to go to Thailand for a week for the World Bank and work with 120 of their people there, training them in the ABT framework. And in 2 weeks, he will be starting the first round of the course ever that he's going to teach entirely. And so along the way, a year ago, he came up with this, what I have labeled the MAT template, and is rapidly propagating. And with all of these ideas, as we've been fleshing out this ABT framework, it begins with people tossing out thoughts and ideas, and then it's a selective process. If it's really good, it catches fire and sticks, and if it's not, we can't remember it. But this was one of those things that the moment he mentioned it, I instantly kind of recoiled, like, wow, that's really interesting. And what it is basically taking the and but therefore, the three forces: agreement, contradiction, and consequence, and translating them into the simplest, broadest, most emotional versions, which are the way it's formulated is heaven and heaven, but hell, therefore action. And it's very, very deep. And I'd be interested to listen to you trying to experiment a bit with your folks there, because what it is that you begin the communication process not with the problem. And here's one of the observations for us. Mike Strauss and I have done a bunch of stuff with he works with AAAS, and they have every year this group of superstar high school seniors. And so we've done a workshop for several years now with them on ABT stuff. And I tend to be pessimistic about it. I don't know that the high school level, they can really grasp this about. They especially can't get it in one session. But one of the things that we see when we ask them to write an ABT with no coaching, basically just use these 3 words, is they all tend to put the problem in the and the setup. They go right to the problem. And that's because they haven't developed context yet. And they're working on they're sequencing a gene, but they don't really know what this gene is for, why it's important, why this gene is versus all these other things. They don't know that. They don't know how to put that up front and begin with the context. It's so fascinating, so deep, and so important in understanding young people that they just don't have context developed yet. And their only ability to lead is by talking about problems. They don't have the big picture. They can't have it. They don't have enough life experience yet. They haven't developed their frontal lobes completely. I think that's an element. And it's all these sorts of things. There's a reason why no Pulitzer Prizes go for novelists to people in their teens or even their 20s. You look at the age distribution, it's all 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. It takes time to develop this narrative structure stuff, and yet it's overwhelmingly important. And this is great that you're right there on the cutting edge working on it. And so this MAT template is the idea of heaven and heaven. It means that by using that simple little word for guidance, it's like you were talking about with the Dobzhansky, that's a one-word thing that helps you get to the core of what you're talking about. This is starting them off by thinking about, I want you to tell me about heaven for whatever it is you're working on. And we've had a few scientists push back and say, well, that's good for the general public, but it's not really relevant for research scientists. Yes, it is. It's relevant for everybody because you've got your versions of heaven. What is heaven? Heaven for you is finding this one missing link fossil or this missing link track or something like that. Exactly. You could sit there and you could daydream all day long. Tell me about heaven in your world. Well, it would be the day when I finally come across this. That would be absolute heaven. I would be celebrating that night. I've just entered into heaven, whatever. There's a slightly humorous element to it. But that said, everybody needs to be thinking about that. And this is what we're beating on the environmentalists about nowadays. You people have really damaged your cause by too many decades of pounding on the negative, going right to the problem. This is what Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, was about. I'm constantly pounding on that, and people hate me for it if they're environmentalists, but somebody's got to speak the truth. That movie did nothing but go right to the problem. You people have ruined our planet. You've destroyed the atmosphere. And then it went through all this bad news on and on and on and on and on. And at the end, somehow thought that, but there's hope. That's, they did a reverse ABT. The whole thing was all problem. And then at the end, but there's hope. Therefore, go do this. That doesn't work. You've got to begin with heaven. You've got to begin by telling us, what are we working towards? What's our goal? And getting us inspired that that's a really cool goal, and getting us to understand, that if you found that one missing link track or who knows what that would tell us, if we find this, then suddenly, and that becomes the other tool that we've developed that's really played out in the book now, or laid out, the if-then tool, which goes hand in hand with that, which is you start talking about heaven, and then we want to know, well, and if we reach your vision of heaven, then what would that do for us? And if you can fill in the then part with something really wonderful, then we're inspired. And then our next question is, well, are we there? And then that's where you drop the butt bomb. That's the other term we introduce in the new book. And that's something for you to experiment definitely with these students, because that comes from Keisha Barr and Marlis Douglas, the 2 co-authors of the new version of the book, from their graduate students. Their students came up with this term, the butt bomb. And try that out with your students, because that's that is so simple. I'm using it with my screenwriter friend right now for his episodes of the TV show that he's doing for a major network, which is, where's your butt bomb here? You've got to have the butt bomb. That's what fires up the brain. That's what hell is. Hell is but, as much as I've told you about how wonderful the world would be if we found these missing link tracks, but we're not even close. We've never even found a hint of, we don't even know where to look for them, something like that. Therefore, we're doing this. Is that making sense, those elements?
Yeah, and I also like the comic potential of saying, come on, students, let me hear your butt bombs.
I'm telling you, that is exactly right.
That's comedy gold right there.
Well, everywhere except for the World Bank in Thailand. Matt, can you tell us how it went with the butt bomb t-shirt?
Well, the t-shirt wasn't a big sell, but the butt bomb itself, like when I got to that point of the lecture, I feel like that's when everyone in the audience like perked up and was like, okay, so what's this butt bomb thing you've been like teasing the entire time? And that's the term that kept getting used. I had all these like world bankers, like these old crusty people, and they're like, you know, like older generations, like telling me, oh, that butt bomb stuff was amazing. Thank you for telling us that. Like, oh, well,
It's memorable.
It really is. Yeah, it's so powerful. And that's, these things pop up. And, you know, my first moment is I always have to rethink everything. You know, look, we've got a whole body of knowledge here. You've told me this new term. Does this really work? Yeah, it actually does work. Yeah, no, it really works. No, wait a second. Now it makes blah, blah, blah. And that's what's happened with that one, was that Keisha and Marlis introduced it. And then with only a few weeks, I started thinking it through and running it by people and catching fire. Then the horrible thing I did was I forced Matt to make up some t-shirts that had a picture of a bomb with a butt on it, and it said dropping butt bombs to fight global poverty. I thought that would be a big hit there. Not so much. It didn't cross the different cultures of the South Asia people, but that's okay. You got to try these experiments from time to time, and hopefully keep a sense of humor about it. But no, I want to use you as an experimental testing ground for these sorts of things and hear your feedback as you try them out, see what happens with the butt bomb, because that is just the simplest thing. And it's what's needed for communication, you know, is the simplicity stuff. It's just another little anecdote. This morning, I had a long catch up chat with Dr. Patricia Limerick at University of Colorado, kind of legendary historian who is a MacArthur fellow, and she's been part of the course all along. And she was telling me how much she's using the ABT now with these history graduate students that are working on these dissertations that are just mountains of studies and information and knowledge. And they sit down to, you know, what's your dissertation on? And they go into end mode, and you just get lost. And now she's using the ABT as a starting point. And she said, you wouldn't believe how many of these conferences I can keep pulling them back. You told me at the beginning your ABT is this, and now you're off in this other thing. It doesn't relate to you, right? Let's get back to the ABT. Focus is the challenge in a world of too much information. So that's really fun. How much more will you be working with ABT this semester with them? You say that they'll eventually do a presentation using it?
Yeah, the idea is, and actually in class today, I gave them 3x5 index cards. And I said, okay, so you're going to take what we chose last week. I had them thinking about a personal environmental science story. And I give them a long list of here are environmental science topics. So from those, which one interests you the most? And then what connects to a personal experience you had? And it does get into the challenge you were talking about, that maybe they haven't lived long enough to have those experiences, but I have found that they have. It's something that they might have experienced it when they were 7 or 8 years old. It might have been last year, but something has happened in their life when they think about it deeply enough that there's this significant pivotal story in their life.
Okay. Now let me push you more on this, because this is where it gets so challenging. And another one of these filmmaker buddies of mine, yesterday we had a long talk. Can't give away any of the programs they're involved with, but he's involved in a huge documentary for Netflix, and they're doing interviews, and he was calling me for ABT suggestions on this stuff. And I was telling him, interviews should not be a happy, fun time. You know, you should be annoying. You should be pushing deep inside of these people, because that's how narrative gets developed. It doesn't get developed by everybody having a happy, fun, unbounded time. It gets developed by people pushing inside your brain, saying, tell me more, get more specific. I want to know these details of you. I need you to constrain this down. And that's it. I was coaching him on yesterday. It was so fascinating, because he'd listened to a few of the sessions, and he was picking up on one of these themes that's emerged, which is expected versus observed. And, you know, I want to encourage you to read the new book. It's pretty short, as you know, but that's also in there. This is one of the patterns I've come to realize with my science background, is that effective communication is not much more complicated than expected versus observed. And that's the heaven thing. You're telling us about the expected world. You know, I thought I was going to live in a world of heaven. This is what it would look like. And then you're hitting us with the butt bomb, which is the observed. And then you start thinking about, you would know this from statistics. You know, that's all that statistics are, comparing the expected versus observed. And my buddy picked up on those. He had already mentioned those terms to me. He said, what would you think if I try and use this with the interviews, try and push people on the expected? I mean, he's in the middle of this documentary about the drug trade and these guys doing these busts. And he said, what would you think if I asked this guy, you know, when you guys went into that house, what were you expecting? And then what did you observe, or, what happened? It's that contrast from expected to observed that has got all the power right there. And so I would push those students in that direction. And that's where the heaven thing comes in. That's, your expected ought to be your heaven. And that, again, is the failing of the environmental movement, is the failure to paint us a picture of the world that you want, that you expect us to work with you to fight for. If you can't give us that, don't just assume that we have the shared vision or whatever. Getting into that. So these are all things for you to poke and prod a bit. But the key thing I was mentioning along those lines is it's this social dynamic that, is at the core of our thing. And what I'd like to encourage you to also do is notice in the new book, in the first appendix, I've given the whole trade secret away. The first appendix is the working circle model, explained in detail how other people can run working circles, not involving us at all. And that's what we're now turning the course into that. We're changing the whole mindset of the course. This is no longer 10 one-hour sessions and then good luck to you. This is now 10 hours of preparation for you to go run working circles, which we want to schedule them before we even start the course, because it's the working circles that are the structured exercise that will push people's brains. And that's the thing, you've got to constrain people and push them to get into that stuff. And that's why you have a working circle of 3 or 4 other people that are pushing and pushing, asking those questions and seeing what's in the head, because there's so much stuff that's there that you just don't realize it until you got other people asking you, is it there? Do you have this stuff? Is that making some sense?
Yeah, what we do from the first day is, as I was saying, these paired drills.
Yes.
Of one person reads, the other person listens, is that then I have them switch partners. I've even had them exchange papers and like, okay, now you read out loud your partners, what they wrote.
Yeah.
All of that is training them to also have some trust in one another. And they are honest with one another from the very beginning all the way through. I said constructive criticism is part of this. This is how you make it better, is by the listening, by the revising. All of this is a process, and we're working together with this. It's not you, the lone individual, even if we are using the hero's journey as our template. We are all working together toward this common goal with the message of hope. So that's also something I say the very first day of class, is that if you start going doom and gloom, you lost your audience.
Okay, but let me push you on that and modify that to our realization, because some of these things are cliches at this point. You got to give people hope. The way you give people hope is that opening thing of heaven. That is the actual mechanistic way. Before you get into all the problems, you first show them this thing to desire, and that gives you some source of energy to tap into. And only by then dropping the butt bomb on that, you've lit up people where they're motivated. Like, well, you gave me this thing at the beginning I really want, and you're telling me it's not there. I'm ready to work to get it there. But this idea of ending with, we should, it's so bad. It's so bad what environmentalists have done. They really should be held accountable. And again, I've just seen it for decades now, of them beating the hell out of the public, creating this unlikable voice, and then ending with, but there's hope. That does not work. But there's hope is a phrase that really needs to be phased out. The hope comes up front. You've got to begin by painting this picture, and then you don't ever have to talk about hope. It's organic. If you paint it at the beginning, it's already there inside of people. It's aspirational. I think that's another one of the key words that we've come to realize, is that that's how you motivate people. And you don't even motivate them through hope. You motivate them through something that's aspirational, meaning that they can see that there's a way that they can actually work towards that. So yeah, the deeper we get in this stuff, the more we're seeing fundamental mistakes that have been made in communication to lead us to where we are right now, which is, a lot of work that needs to be done. But you're doing that work, and it's really great. And as I say, if I can be of any help to you, if you want to read the book and you got any questions, if you want me eventually to do a little Zoom session with your folks and just blab at them, answer questions, who knows what, that can always be fun as well, because that'd be a payback for your being an early adopter here. You've put in the time and effort, and so we're kind of seeking out people like that now that can tell us, because we're learning so much from these sorts of stories. How about if we finish here? We're about, I wanted to keep this to limited time, but can you tell us one or two moments of individuals that have used this and come back to you about how it's hit them hard? Anything like that?
Yeah, I've thought about that with some of the stories that come out of the students from doing this process. Is some of them are really remarkable. Like one telling me about when she was growing up on the south side of Chicago. She's first generation college. She didn't really have any experiences with nature, so to speak. She gets in her first year at Emory and she takes this freshwater ecology class. The professor takes her out in the field and she's like, "What? I have to collect bugs? Really?" So there's the taking stock, the catalytic event in her world. Now she's getting her PhD at Yale.
Wait. Let me slow that down. Are you telling us that she was raised with the idea of avoid bugs, and then suddenly
she didn't really understand them, but she had a really good professor who said, "No, here, look, they're cool."
Yeah, right.
She then eventually got invested in it and realized, oh, that's right, this is cool. So she was completely transformed for it. She got her master's at Columbia last year. She's now in a PhD program with an emphasis in environmental science communication and policy. So she's like one of my success stories. I'm like, look at what happened. All because she did that story and realized, there's something about this in the way that you can tell these stories, and they are transformative.
That is really wonderful. And something to add on to that is the more, you should tell her never let go of that story.
Yes.
Hone it and shape it, and don't be afraid to tell it 25 times, because a lot of people feel the need, like, well, I've told that story too many times, but you're always talking to new audiences. And the fact is, the more you do it, the more you shape it better, and the more you get to the point where you can play the moments and really hit the punchline. And that's effective communication eventually with that. To that very point, in this Park Howell podcast that I'm talking about, he interviewed the Marlis and Keisha, the two co-authors of the new book, for his an episode of last fall. And then he pulled out a great part in there where Marlis tells the story. And I'd worked with her a little bit on this story, to tell it, and she told it a few times, but she did a perfect job on Park's podcast. And it's the story of when she finally went home. One day, her mother asked her to explain what she was doing in her research, and she went through all the exciting details. And her mother finally got to the end and said, "And people pay you to do that?" Because she just found it so boring, and how crestfallen she was in that moment. But I've heard her tell the story 5 or 6 times now, and each time her timing gets better on it, and it becomes funnier because she can perform it better. So I would say that back to that student, which is, don't underestimate how much this stuff needs repetition, and it gets better and better, and it's more fun when you can really play the moments like that eventually.
That's right.
It's wonderful. Okay, what's the other one? Yeah, you said you had a second one?
Yeah, let me think.
Or you got a bunch of them?
Yeah, there was another student that he and his family were living in Houston, and I've forgotten which hurricane it was, but it happened just 2 years before then. And it was a horrific hurricane that flooded a lot of Houston. In his neighborhood, there were several people who actually died from it. So he had that as a story of where they had their ordinary world completely overturned by this catalytic event. They had to take stock. How do you overcome that? And with that, then he had a really good story that it was personal, it was emotional, but then he was also able to inject the science into it and how science was a part of that.
This is all music to my ears, hearing you talk and using a phrase like taking stock. You've got deep narrative intuition going on at that point, where you're using these different phrases. And by the way, that's the if-then tool. I encourage you to dig deeper on that, get to the point where you can start to hear and use that with these students. Tell me right now in detail, if this happens, then what? And the way it kind of came around to me was a graduate student talking about a chapter in her dissertation in which she told about something, and she just assumed that everybody knew that if we figured out which neurons were involved with pain versus pleasure, what that would do for designing drugs. And turns out nobody knows that except the people in her lab, really. And when I hit that moment of forcing her to articulate that, and she said it all, it was tremendous. And then That was it. And in fact, Diana Padilla, who teaches the segment in the course about proposal writing, she flipped over that. She was a program officer with NSF for a year along the way in her career. And she listened to Park Howell's presentation and just said, there's so much of this business stuff he's talking about that is so relevant to proposal writing. And she's probably given it 15 or 20 times now in the course. It just gets better and better. And in that, one of the most powerful parts she goes through is this if-then tool. That's what you're doing with proposals. If you give me the money, then this is what's going to happen. You've got to explain that back to the people with the money, and so many people just assume, well, give me the money and the world will be good. No, they need to hear back. If you give me the money, then the world is going to get this much better. So that's a good exercise, I think, to push the students into, well, if we do this work, then what? That is tremendous. Okay. All right. I spent a lot of the time talking through this quote interview with you, but that's okay because it's a discussion, because I could hear from the outset how well you've gotten all this, and that it's just such a match with narrative intuition, which means that I want to keep in touch and, let's communicate a lot more than we have in the past, and probably have you back again sometime, because you're clearly one of our incubators there at the undergraduate level.
That's right.
Yeah.
And like I said, the students have been terrific with this. It's been really rewarding for me to be able to see this maturity, and also from the very first day of class, trying to get across the message that there is hope at the very beginning, but also that simple is not simplistic.
Yes.
We
That's
talked about that the very first day.
fundamental divide.
Why write the word utilize when you can use?
Yeah. For your next first day presentation, I would encourage you to think about heaven and being able to talk to them about it. Heaven for me with this whole training is that 2 years, 3 years from now, I'll hear something back from you guys saying that this was transformative to me. Everybody's got their vision of heaven. And, it's huge credit to Matt that he's the guy that saw this and put it out there. And as I say, we're using it day in and day out. One of the top guys at World Bank last fall did the training in Nepal and then went to one of their locations and did a 90-second ABT on camera, in which the first part was all heaven. We're doing this huge project here, and if this works, then we're going to have all these great things. But right now we're hitting these challenges. Really powerful, and that's why they bought in so deep on it. So, okay, cool, man. Keep me posted on the course. Thank you so much for taking the time joining us. And stay tuned for more episodes of the ABT Time podcast.
It was a pleasure, Randy. Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks.